Gospel according to St. Luke, the 13th chapter. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. My daughter-in-law, Hannah, is one of the smartest people I know. A graduate of the University of Virginia, she received straight A's on her way to earning her bachelor's degree. From there, she went on to the University of Washington, where she earned her doctorate in education, after graduating with honors at the top of the class. After working for a while for the Seattle Mariners, she was offered a position with the University of Washington, her alma mater, where she was given the position of Assistant Director of the university's Center for Leadership and Athletics, and that's where she serves today. In addition to her teaching graduate-level courses, she spends a lot of her time traveling around the country, speaking, leading workshops, teaching and training college and high school coaches to be better coaches. She's very highly regarded in her field, and as I said earlier, she is one very smart cookie. On the other hand, maybe she's not so smart, at least according to her 4-year-old daughter, Blake, my granddaughter. Recently, I volunteered to go on a school outing with my granddaughter Blake's Montessori school, and I have to say, what an experience taking a bunch of 4-year-olds to a botanical garden. This happened to be in Bellevue, Washington. It's kind of like herding kittens. Well, the kids were great. We did have a lot of fun, and there was a botanist who was assigned to our group who was very good with kids, and I have to admit she was very knowledgeable. As we went down the path, she pointed out every species, every plant. She was very, very good. But we came to one particular plant that the botanist didn't say anything about, and those kids did not miss that. They pointed out to her, "But you didn't say anything about that one. What is that plant? I want to know what that plant, what does it tell us? What's that plant?" And the woman was very good. She said, "You know, kids, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what that plant is, so rather than tell you something that might be wrong, I'm just going to say, I don't know." Well, it was my little granddaughter, Blake, 4 years old, who was the one to jump in. She said, "Well, my mom is super smart. If she was here, she'd be able to tell you what that plant is." The botanist again was so good. "Oh, wow, she sounds super smart. You must have a wonderful mom. I wish she was here so she could tell us what that plant is." Well, my granddaughter said, "Me too. I wish she was here." And she paused for a second. She said, "Well, she doesn't know everything, but she knows a lot." Again, the tour guide said, "Well, what a great mom. I bet she does know a lot." Finally, my granddaughter said, "Well, actually," that's her favorite word lately is actually. She said, "Well, actually, my mom doesn't know that much. Sometimes she just doesn't know anything." Well, I couldn't help but smile at that. Somehow her mother, in the blink of an eye, had gone from knowing everything to knowing quite a bit to not knowing anything at all. So which is true? Is my daughter-in-law, Dr. Hannah Owings Olson, Blake's mother, smart? Does she know everything? Does she know a lot? Does she know very little? Does she know nothing? Well, apparently it depends on who you ask. So many things in life are like that, aren't they? Depends on who you ask. I had to go to the hardware store the other day to shop for a power tool. I know, unlike Doug, I know very little about power tools, so I just asked the salesman, so which is the best brand? Well, you want to guess what his answer was? Depends on who you ask. What you will find out about me over time is that I'm a huge baseball fan. I like to think that baseball history and trivia is one of my hobbies. And so in my opinion, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt what's the greatest baseball team of all time, the 1927 New York Yankees. But were the 1927 New York Yankees really the greatest team ever? Well, depends on who you ask. What's the greatest movie of all time? I think it's The Sound of Music. Partly because I have a personal attachment to it. It was the first movie that my mother ever took me to, but it's a great movie. Is it the greatest movie of all time? Well, it depends on who you ask. And in my humble opinion, Lutherans do potlucks better than anybody else. So what's the best dish served at a good old-fashioned Lutheran potluck? Well, in my opinion, it's the green jello. I don't like green jello anywhere but at Lutheran potluck, so whoever it is that made the green jello for last week's potluck, thank you. You made my day. Is green jello the best dish served at a potluck? Well, hands up for you. You got the hang. So we use that phrase a lot about a lot of things, and it could just as easily be applied to today's gospel reading. This story about how Jesus has an encounter with a leader of the synagogue, a very prominent leader who probably, by all accounts, is every bit as respected and smart as my learned daughter-in-law, Hannah. Both this leader and Jesus claimed to be right. Both made good arguments for being right, but who was ultimately right? Well, it depends on who you ask. The leader of the synagogue has a very clear and well-known understanding of the law on his side. You are not supposed to work on the Sabbath, period. And in those days, virtually anything was work. If you walked more than a few steps on that day, it was considered work. You just didn't work. You didn't work on Sabbath. Now, it's not like this leader arbitrarily made up the rule and said, I think I'm going to make a bunch of oppressive rules that people have. No, it's not like he made them up. The laws were given to the Israelites after their exodus from Egypt. Remember how they had to slave away night and day, never so much as getting a day off. When God gave them this commandment to observe Sabbath rest, to literally take one day of the week for renewing their bodies and souls and spirits, don't you think that they saw that as tremendous news? They were ecstatic. Now, to be clear, laws are necessary. Laws help order our world. Imagine our streets and highways and neighborhoods without any laws. Imagine that. Or our schools, or our workplaces, you name it. We have laws and rules everywhere, and we have to have them. But we also need grace. Grace is what gives us joy. Grace is what holds us together as human community. Grace is what makes our life worth living and what helps us to see the best in people. Grace is what shows us what a sacred treasure human relationships are. It's true that we should take Sabbath more seriously. We should. Sometimes we work so long and hard that we have a difficult time disconnecting ourselves from whatever it is that we consider our work to be. Whether it's fixing something, or cleaning something, or making something, or arranging something, or directing something, or in some other way buying into the endless grind of a 24/7 world that says we should never stop doing whatever it is that we're doing. It's easy for us to get caught in the trap of thinking, but if I take a day off, I'll just get so far behind. We tell ourselves that if we do nothing on a given day, that's a day wasted. To his credit, the synagogue leader was intent on seeing that people took time to rest. He wanted time to rest. He wanted people to have that time. And maybe he was worried that if you start making exceptions to that rule, if you allow just one little piece of work to be done, well, that's going to open the floodgates for all kinds of other things, and it's going to fuzzy up the rules, and you're going to not keep the Sabbath at all. So he had the right idea. The synagogue leader was a very well-intentioned man. Sabbath is important. Don't break the rules. Don't even make exceptions, or else those rules and laws won't mean anything. But there's at least one other important player in today's story, and that's the woman who hasn't been able to look anyone in the eye for 18 years. A woman who is used to seeing the world only from the waist down because of her medical condition. She's a faithful, ironically, faithful and law-abiding member of the very same synagogue in which this leader was a member. Each and every week, despite her condition, she is there, and you've got to admire her for that. She's there, just as he is there. She's worshiping with her friends and her family and her community. She's faithfully obeying the laws of her religion, including laws about the Sabbath. In fact, if she was like everyone else in that synagogue, she probably agreed that you cannot and you shall not work on the Sabbath. And yet when Jesus called her over that Sabbath day, I wonder if she might have had second thoughts. I wonder if she found herself wishing, oh, if only there could be one little exception. When Jesus laid his hands on her and said, "You are set free from your ailment." When she took those first breaths of air, her lungs no longer cramped from stooping over. Did she think, no, the law should never be broken under any circumstances? When she stood up straight for the first time in anyone's memory, do you think she still believed there should never be any work done on the Sabbath? What do you think? Now, most likely the laws didn't just fall apart after that. Probably the very next day, those strict and oppressive laws went back into being observed and enforced to the fullest extent, just as they had always been, but for that one brief moment in time. The laws were suspended. They were forgotten in a moment of sheer grace and kindness and mercy. And did you notice how the people there responded that day? Verse 13 says that the now healed woman began praising God. And the last verse of the story says that the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things Jesus was doing. As important as law is, there must be times when it bows to kindness and grace. Laws may provide good guidelines to live by, but it's grace that makes life beautiful. Laws require that we treat each other well, but it's grace that restores us to each other when the law fails us. So who was right that day, the synagogue leader or Jesus? Well, depends on who you ask. Although the crowd's reaction gives a pretty good idea of how most people who were there that day might respond. If I've learned one thing over my years of ministry, it's this: when in doubt, err on the side of grace. When I first became a pastor in the 1980s, the Lutheran Church didn't allow communion to be served to people until they reached a certain age. Now, in the congregation I was serving at the time, it meant that you had to be at least in the 5th grade, and you had to take a first communion class, and you had to have a basic understanding of the sacrament of communion. Well, that rule stood in stark contrast to what I had been repeatedly taught in seminary. In seminary, they said Holy Communion and baptism are two of what the Lutheran Church calls the means of grace. The means of grace, by its very definition, means it's something that can neither be earned, nor deserved, nor even fully understood. It's completely and totally a gift of God, given to God's people without anything people can do to merit it. It's simply a gift. The Lutheran Church, I felt, demonstrated that perfectly in its policies about baptism. Think about it. We baptize even the tiniest of babies who are completely incapable of earning or understanding God's grace. We declare grace to them in their baptism, and it's a perfect image of what grace is all about. God's free gift to God's people without their ability, without any ability whatsoever to earn it or deserve it. But when it came to communion, it was exactly the opposite. You had to take a class. You had to be a certain age. You had to have a certain level of understanding. So if baptism and communion were both means of grace, it didn't make sense to me. There was a disconnect. But being the faithful and obedient pastor that I was in those early years, I observed the law, not wanting to be a rebel. I honored the traditions and the rules of the church. Until one Sunday. People were kneeling at the communion rail that Sunday, much as we do here on Sunday mornings. I was wearing my white robe and my stole and my cross as I am today. I was moving along the line, handing out communion wafers to people, saying to each person, the body of Christ given for you, the body of Christ given for you, the body of Christ given for you, and so on. When I came to one small girl about the age of my little 4-year-old granddaughter, instead I put my hand on her head and I gave her a very brief blessing. After I did that, I moved along the line and continued giving communion to each person after that. Well, I'd gone maybe 2 or 3 people past this little girl when I heard her say to her mom, "Mommy, why didn't that angel give me a cookie?" It was very cute. I started smiling, and I heard a lot of people in the middle of their reverent communion snickering. I couldn't help but smile myself, and I just kept going around the line. I will tell you, for the rest of that day and for some time to come, I really thought about her words, and in fact, they haunted me. Why didn't I give her a cookie? You see, for her, what it was really all about was being included. All around her, she saw people receiving something special. At that age, she couldn't possibly conceive that it was the fullness of God's grace being given in that cookie. But she certainly understood that she was being left out. And I got to wondering, is keeping rules for the good order of the church really that important that it's okay to leave a child, and most likely many children, with a sense that they are excluded? That they somehow aren't worthy of receiving that something special? The answer for me was very clear and resounding no. That's when it occurred to me, when in doubt, err on the side of grace. When in doubt, err on the side of grace. When grace and law come into conflict with one another, err on the side of grace. After sharing my story with the church council and making a recommendation for change, they agreed. We started serving communion to everyone, regardless of age, regardless of their ability to understand it, regardless of their past or present or anything about them. If they came forward for communion, then it meant they were hungry for something that God has to give. Maybe they couldn't identify that hunger, maybe they can't put it into words, but they were there for a reason. God's great delight is to provide what people need. It's hardly mine to judge or to keep people from getting access to God's grace. Err on the side of grace. That little phrase became my rule of thumb for ministry from that day on, and it still is my rule of thumb. I hope it's something that I can leave with you here at Christ Lutheran Church as you prepare to welcome a new pastor in the months ahead. What a tremendous gift you would give that pastor if you could truly live those words as a church and as individuals. Err on the side of grace. Well, in just 7 days, I will have the chance to once again see my daughter-in-law, Hannah, and my beautiful granddaughter, Libby. I will tell them how much I love them and how much I miss them. In my opinion, Hannah will continue to be the smartest, one of the smartest people I know, and Blake will always be the most wonderful and beautiful granddaughter anyone could ever ask for. Although I rather suspect that even now some of you grandparents are thinking,